Black CEO removed from VIP seat for a white passenger. 5 minutes later, the entire staff is fired. I'm sorry, sir, but this seat is for real platinum members. Marcus Richardson looked up slowly, calm, composed. He had built a $2,800,000,000 0-cent tech empire from nothing. He had paid for this first-class ticket in full. But all that didn't matter today. Not the company, not the money, not the legacy. Because in the eyes of a flight attendant and an entitled woman tapping her diamond watch, he was just another black man who didn't belong. What they didn't know, in 5 minutes, their careers would be over. And the man they tried to humiliate was the only one who could save them. There's a silence you only hear in first class. The hush of soft jazz playing overhead, the whisper of silk suits and leather shoes, the clink of champagne glasses raised by strangers who've never tasted hardship. But today, C2A would host something far louder than luxury. It would host a reckoning. Marcus Richardson wasn't a man who demanded attention. He didn't wear designer logos or flash Rolexes to prove he mattered. In fact, as he stepped onto the Skylux Airlines jet that morning, his quiet demeanor made him almost invisible. But invisibility was something Marcus had known his whole life. And he had spent 2 decades making sure no one could ignore him ever again. At 42, Marcus was the founder and CEO of Right Tech Solutions, a $2,800,000,000 0-cents AI firm that had revolutionized customer experience across the globe. From luxury brands to hospital systems, his technology was the unseen force that treated people like people, not profiles. Which made what happened on that flight not just ironic, it made it deeply personal. Marcus had boarded early, laptop in hand, ready to review his keynote speech for the Global Ethics and Technology Conference. He'd chosen seat 2A intentionally for the extra legroom, the quiet, the peace. But peace, as always, had to be earned. As he settled in, a woman's voice cut through the cabin like a blade dipped in honey. "Excuse me, sir. There seems to be a mistake. We need you to move for our VIP passenger." Jessica, the flight attendant, wore a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her stood Karen Whitfield, the epitome of privilege in pearls and a power suit, tapping her designer watch with the entitlement of someone used to getting exactly what she wanted. Marcus blinked, confused. I'm sorry. This is my seat." He showed his boarding pass, his platinum member card. But that wasn't enough. Not for them. Not for someone like him. "This seat is usually reserved for our better customers," Jessica said, her tone slipping from service to suggestion. "Miss Whitfield always sits here. It's practically her seat." The implication wasn't subtle. He didn't belong. Not here, not in this seat, not in this skin. Passengers began to glance over. One reached for her phone. Another murmured, "Just let him sit. What's the big deal?" But the staff didn't back down, they doubled down. Said, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Marcus had faced that threat before, as a boy in South Chicago, as a teen applying for scholarships, as a founder begging investors to believe a black man could build billion-dollar code. He had learned that dignity often came with a cost. But some costs were worth paying. "I'm not moving," he said. 6 words, calmly spoken, but they shifted something in the cabin, and soon everything changed. What Jessica and Karen didn't know, what Trevor the cabin supervisor didn't know, was that the man they were pressuring owned 25% of Skylux Airlines through silent investment partners, and the software they desperately needed to modernize their outdated systems had belonged to him, the man they were about to humiliate, the man they were about to drag off the plane. And in the cruelest twist of fate, they were doing it just hours before he was scheduled to save their company. As security was called, as passengers recorded, as whispers turned to outrage, Marcus remained still, He didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He just reached for his phone and pressed record. "This is my seat. Paper. I pay for it. I earned it. And I'm being removed because I refused to give it to someone they preferred more." The video would go viral. The story would break every media outlet before the plane even landed. But this isn't just a story about injustice. It's a story about power, about integrity, about what happens when a man who could destroy you chooses to teach you instead. Because Marcus didn't just expose Skylux Airlines. He gave them a chance to transform. And in doing so, he gave the world a lesson it would never forget. Section 1. The seat that changed everything. The air inside the first-class cabin turned cold, not from the temperature, but from something far more chilling. Attention. Marcus could feel it press against his skin like static. Every movement, every glance, every word now carried weight. He looked down at his boarding pass once more, even though he already knew what it said. Seat 2A, Marcus Richardson, Platinum Elite member. He hadn't gotten this seat by accident. He'd chosen Skylux because he believed in the idea of excellence, because it stood for something, because he still wanted to believe that the world could treat people fairly when they worked hard and did everything right. But it was never really about the seat, was it? It was about what people saw when they looked at him, and what they refused to see. Jessica, the flight attendant, returned, this time not alone. Behind her was Trevor Langford, cabin supervisor. Tall, crisp uniform, silver hair that gave him an air of authority. But Marcus could tell instantly, Trevor wasn't here to listen. He was here to command. "Sir," Trevor began, his voice clipped and firm, "we need you to cooperate and move to a different seat so we can resolve this situation amicably." "This is my seat," Marcus said again, calm but unshakable. "I understand that," Trevor replied, "but Miss Whitfield is a regular Platinum member. She always flies in 2A. Surely you understand how valuable loyalty is to us." Marcus slowly turned his gaze toward Karen Whitfield, who stood smugly a few feet away. She didn't even attempt to hide the superiority in her eyes. "I always sit there," she said, her voice floating through the cabin like poison perfume. "It's practically mine." The passengers around them started to whisper. Some raised eyebrows. A few pulled out phones. Others exchanged glances filled with unease. The scene felt wrong, off, like watching someone being punished for a crime they hadn't committed. Trevor's face tightened. "Sir, you're creating a disturbance. We don't want to escalate." "No," Marcus said gently, "but you already have." Jessica shifted uncomfortably behind Trevor. Her eyes flicked between Marcus and Karen, and then, without a word, Karen took a step forward. And in that moment, time slowed. She slipped her hand into her handbag, pulled out a small folded wad of bills, and, like a scene from a bad movie, slid it into Jessica's pocket. "Thank you for your help, dear," Karen whispered. It was soft, but loud enough for the woman in seat 3C to catch it on video. Loud enough for the man across the aisle to glance in disbelief. Loud enough for Marcus to hear. He didn't move, didn't react, but inside, something shifted. This wasn't about inconvenience anymore. It was discrimination wrapped in silk, injustice dressed in etiquette. And it was far from over. Minutes passed. Then came the heavy, unmistakable footsteps of someone with real authority. The cockpit door opened. Out stepped Captain James Reynolds, a veteran pilot with 30 years under his belt, respected for his calm under pressure. But today, he looked like a man sent into a storm he didn't understand. "What's going on here?" the captain asked, his voice firm. Trevor explained, carefully curated words, avoiding the mention of money or preference. "The gentleman is refusing to give up his seat to our preferred guest." "Preferred," Marcus said, standing his ground, "or just preferred over me?" The captain's jaw tensed. He turned to Marcus. Sir, for the comfort of everyone on board, we're asking that you move to another first-class seat. Captain, Marcus said, voice still calm, there is no policy that requires me to give up my assigned seat. I'm not disturbing anyone. I paid, I arrived early, and I'm a Platinum Elite member. This isn't about policy, Trevor interrupted. It's about cooperation. Marcus replied, it's about bias. Gotcha. He reached into his blazer pocket, took out his phone and pressed record. This is for my protection, he said clearly. I want to document what's happening here. Trevor's eyes widened. You can't record, he barked, reaching toward the phone. Actually, Marcus responded calmly, there's no law that prohibits filming unless it interferes with flight duties, which this isn't. The tension in the cabin had reached a boiling point. Dozens of eyes watched. A few phones already captured the scene. That's when the worst moment arrived. Two men in dark uniforms stepped onto the plane, called by the captain. They walked straight down the aisle to Marcus. Sir, we've been informed that you're being disruptive, one officer said, unsure, glancing nervously between the crew and Marcus. What policy have I broken? Marcus asked quietly. Silence. You need to gather your belongings, sir, the other said, dodging the question. He stood. Slowly, gracefully, and the entire cabin watched as a man who had done nothing wrong, nothing but exist, was escorted out of his seat. Not a single curse word. Not a single raised voice. Just quiet dignity. As he walked past Trevor, Karen and Jessica, Karen smirked. Some people really don't understand how things work. But she wasn't prepared for what came next. Because at that very moment, as Marcus stepped off the plane, he pulled out his phone again and typed one message. Elise, assemble the legal team. We're going to war. Section 2. The viral explosion and the reckoning begins. The airport lounge was buzzing with the usual rhythm of a weekday morning. Executives checking emails, tourists snapping selfies, the occasional clink of coffee cups. But in a quiet corner, a storm was brewing. Marcus Richardson sat alone, his laptop open, his phone vibrating non-stop on the table beside him. He ignored the calls, the texts, the notifications stacking up by the hundreds. He was focused on something else. A single video. Captured shakily from a phone camera, but devastatingly clear. A confrontation. A quiet dignity. A flight attendant's condescension. The captain's hollow threats. And most damning of all, the bribe slipping into a pocket like a dirty secret caught in broad daylight. In just 3 hours, the footage had 2.4 million views. And it was still climbing. Across the city, inside a glass-walled boardroom high above downtown, Richard Williams, the CEO of Skylux Airlines, leaned back in his chair, staring at a massive monitor displaying the worst PR nightmare of his career. His communications director, Janet, hovered nearby, pale and frantic. We have a serious situation, she said, voice tight. The video's trending everywhere. Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, major news outlets. CNN is reaching out for comment. Celebrities are picking it up too. Passengers get removed all the time, Williams said dismissively, waving a hand. Issue the standard disruptive passenger statement and move on. Janet hesitated, his voice barely bubbling. You don't understand. This isn't just about removal. The video shows discrimination and money changing hands. Williams frowned. Money. Janet nodded grimly. Caught on camera, twice, clear as day. Williams felt a cold sweat forming at the back of his neck. This wasn't a standard disruption. This wasn't a bad customer. This was a catastrophic corporate scandal. But it wasn't until the next sentence left Janet's lips that he truly understood the gravity of what they had done. The passenger removed was Marcus Richardson. For a heartbeat, the room was silent. Then Williams shot upright in his chair. For Marcus Richardson, from Right Tech Solutions. Yes, sir. The same Right Tech we've been courting for a $50 million 0 cents modernization deal. The same Marcus Richardson who, according to our stockholder reports, owns close to 25% of our company through shell investors. Williams collapsed back into his seat, the blood draining from his face. In a single morning, Skylux had humiliated, assaulted, and publicly exposed the man who literally held their future in his hands. Meanwhile, back at the lounge, Marcus quietly tapped out a message to his COO, Elise Thompson. Activate Plan B. It was a message they'd prepared years ago for an entirely different kind of corporate battle, but today it would be deployed for something far more personal. The first move came swiftly. Press releases from RightTech's media division hit major outlets within minutes. RightTech founder removed from Skylux flight despite valid first-class ticket and platinum status. Video surfaces showing discriminatory treatment of black CEO on Skylux Airlines. RightTech CEO calls for accountability and systemic reform after discrimination incident. Each statement was carefully worded. Marcus wasn't suing yet. He wasn't threatening yet. He was inviting Skylux to explain themselves. And it was an invitation they had no idea how to answer. Back inside Skylux headquarters, chaos reigned. Executives argued in hushed tones. Phones rang off the hook. Reporters camped outside the building, microphones thrust forward like weapons. But none of that compared to the blow that fell next. The stock price. In just 4 hours, Skylux shares had dropped 12%. Analysts predicted it could fall another 30% before market close if the situation wasn't contained. And it wasn't just investors pulling back. Major partners and sponsors were distancing themselves, issuing vague statements about ongoing reviews and commitments to diversity and inclusion. Skylux Airlines wasn't facing a bad day. They were facing extinction. Trevor Langford, Jessica Miller, and Captain Reynolds, the 3 staff members at the heart of the scandal, sat in a cramped conference room, summoned without explanation. Each of them nervously fiddled with their uniforms, eyes darting toward the door every time footsteps approached. When the HR director finally entered, flanked by 2 grim-faced security officers, the message was clear. "Your employment with Skylux Airlines," she said, voice cold and formal, "is terminated, effective immediate." Jessica gasped, tears springing to her eyes. Trevor's jaw fell open in stunned disbelief. Captain Reynolds simply closed his eyes, sagging into his chair like a man defeated by his own failures. The HR director laid 3 folders on the table. Inside each, a termination letter, a severance agreement, and a non-disclosure contract they had the option to sign, or not. It wouldn't matter either way. The videos were already out. The world had already judged them. That afternoon, Marcus sat in a private meeting room at the airport with Elise and his legal counsel. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't celebrating. His face was calm, but there was a heaviness to his eyes. "This isn't about revenge," Marcus said, sliding his phone across the table where the viral video looped endlessly. "It's about making sure this never happens again, to anyone." Elise nodded. "And about showing them who they tried to humiliate you." Marcus leaned back. "No, about showing them who they could have had as a partner, if they had just treated me like a human being." He looked out the window, watching planes take off into the wide, forgiving sky. "Sometime," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "God lets you walk into fire, just to show the world you can't be burned." Section 3. The emergency shareholder meeting. The boardroom at Skylux headquarters had never been so silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed a grey, storm-heavy sky. Rows of mahogany chairs lined the room, each occupied by powerful men and women, executives, board members, senior investors, all of them summoned urgently with 2 words. Emergency meeting. But no one spoke now. They were waiting for the man whose humiliation had set their empire on fire. Waiting for the man who could destroy them with a single sentence. And when Marcus Richardson finally entered, he didn't need to announce himself. His presence said everything. He wore the same tailored navy suit from that morning. No change of clothes, no attempt to hide the ordeal he'd been through. It was a silent declaration. I don't need to dress differently to deserve respect. At his side walked Elise Thompson, COO of Right Tech Solutions, and two unfamiliar faces, legal counsel and a tall woman with warm brown eyes and a quiet strength in her step. Her name was Dr. Naomi Carter. Once, long ago, she had been more than just Marcus's chief ethics officer. Once, she had been someone he loved. But that was a different life. A life before ambition built walls around Marcus's heart. Today she was here, not for the past, but for justice. And perhaps, just perhaps, the spark that had once existed between them wasn't entirely extinguished. Richard Williams, CEO of Skylux, stood awkwardly at the head of the room. He tried to force a smile. Failed. Mr. Richardson, thank you for meeting with us. We want to express our deepest apologies. Marcus held up a hand. I'm not here for apologies. The words dropped like stones into a frozen lake. I'm here for accountability. He moved to the end of the long conference table. He didn't sit. He wanted them to look up at him, to see the man they had tried to erase. Elise set up a monitor. With a single click, the viral video began to play, bright, brutal, undeniable. The room watched in stunned silence. Jessica's fake politeness, Trevor's condescension, Karen's whispered bribes, the captain's hollow threats, Marcus's calm resistance, and most damning of all, the money exchanging hands, twice. The footage ended. The room stayed frozen. Some executives looked down, ashamed. Others glared at Trevor and Jessica's images like they could wish them away. But it was too late. Marcus leaned forward slightly. This is not just about what happened to me. It's about what happens every day to people without my resources. People who can't fight back. He paused, letting the words settle. You didn't humiliate a CEO. You humiliated every single person who believed in your company's image. And now you have to decide. Are you going to change? Or are you going to die clinging to the illusion that nothing's wrong? William cleared his throat, his voice cracking slightly. Mr. Richardson, what are your demands? Marcus's gaze swept the room. First, immediate termination of every staff member involved, with no possibility of rehire. Second, mandatory anti-bias training for every Skylux employee, developed and overseen by RightTech's ethics division. Third, a public apology, not to me, but to every passenger who's ever been treated as less. He straightened. Failure to comply means two things. And I liquidate my 25% stake. And I cancel the $50 million, 0 cents modernization contract you desperately need to survive. Murmurs filled the room. Panic flashed across Williams's face. They all knew, without Marcus's investment and technology, Skylux's future was finished. The CFO leaned toward Williams, whispering urgently. The legal counsel furiously scribbled notes. But it didn't matter, because everyone understood Marcus wasn't negotiating. This was the cost of survival. And then, from the corner of his eye, Marcus caught a movement. Naomi. For a moment, their gazes locked. 1,000 memories crashed between them. Late nights coding in cramped apartments. Shared dreams about changing the world. The way she used to believe in him, before the world taught him to harden his heart. She gave him a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. Not just of Skylux, but maybe, just maybe, of something inside Marcus himself. Richard Williams finally spoke. "We accept your terms." It wasn't a negotiation. It was a surrender. By evening, the press releases hit every major outlet. Skylux Airline announces comprehensive overhaul following discrimination scandal. CEO Marcus Richardson leads historic corporate reform initiative. New standards for ethical customer treatment set by Right Tech Solutions. The headlines were triumphant. But Marcus didn't stay for the celebrations. He found Naomi standing by the elevators, arms crossed, watching the city lights flicker through the rain. He walked toward her, uncertain for the first time in years. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for coming back." Naomi smiled, sad and beautiful all at once. "You didn't need me to fight this battle, Marcus," she said. "But maybe you needed someone to remind you what you were fighting for." They stood there, silence folding around them like a familiar blanket. Not quite lovers. Not quite strangers. Something new, something fragile, beginning again. Outside, the storm broke with a lurch, rain lashing against the glass. Inside, for the first time in years, Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. Something he thought he had buried long ago. Hope. Section 4, the transformation begins. For the first time in its 3-decade history, Skylux Airlines stood still. Flights were grounded. The gates were empty. The grand skylines of airports, once bustling with prestige, now sat in an eerie, unfamiliar quiet. It was a decision that cost millions. And yet no one dared question it. Because Skylux wasn't just fixing a PR problem. They were trying to save their soul. And standing at the heart of this transformation was Marcus Richardson. At 7:00 AM sharp, every Skylux employee, from senior executives to baggage handlers, hastily erected into makeshift conference centers, hastily erected inside terminals nationwide. Gone were the crisp suits and polished uniforms. Today, everyone wore simple clothes, comfortable, equal. There would be no hierarchy here, no first class, no economy, just people, learning, facing themselves. Marcus stood at the podium in the main training hall, facing hundreds of employees who had once believed discrimination was something that happened somewhere else, to someone else. Beside him was Dr. Naomi Carter, who had agreed to lead the ethics reformation programming. He glanced at her briefly, a silent thread of trust weaving between them. Then he began. No script, no speechwriter, just truth. "I know many of you feel scared," Marcus said, voice carrying through the wide, silent room. "Shamed, anger, maybe even defensive. That's okay. Growth starts in discomfort." He paused, letting his words breathe. "What, let me be clear, this isn't just about saving Skylux Airlines. It's about saving who you are when no one is watching." He leaned forward, his voice soft but unyielding. "Because character isn't built when the cameras are rolling. It's built when you have the power to hurt someone, and you choose not to." The room shifted. Some employees bowed their heads. Others blinked rapidly, swallowing hard. Marcus took a deep breath. "This is not about blaming. It's about becoming better than what we inherited." And in that moment, something remarkable happened. The room, filled with people from different backgrounds, different ranks, different dreams, leaned in. They wanted to change. Not for Marcus. Not for Skylux, but for themselves. Over the next 48 hours, every single Skylux employee underwent the most intensive anti-bias, empathy, and inclusion training ever implemented in the airline industry. Simulation exercises placed employees into scenarios where unconscious bias seeped in unnoticed, A child traveling alone whose last name didn't sound American. A business traveler who didn't wear designer clothes. A grandmother struggling with language barriers at check-in. Every mistake, every wrong assumption was played back in real time. No excuses. No sugarcoating. Only raw, sometimes painful, learning. Late on the second evening, after the last session ended, Marcus wandered through the quiet terminal. He was exhausted, not physically but emotionally. Every success brought memories of past failures. Every hopeful face reminded him of the ones who had given up before change ever reached them. He found Naomi sitting alone on a bench overlooking the tarmac, her hair falling softly across her shoulders, a laptop balanced on her knees. Without a word, he sat beside her. For a long moment, they simply watched the planes, grounded, silent, waiting. Like two soldiers after a long battle, they shared a peace words couldn't touch. Finally, Naomi spoke. "You were brilliant today." Marcus smiled faintly. "I was just telling the truth." Naomi closed her laptop, turning to him fully. "It's more than that, Marcus. You made them feel it. You made them believe it was possible." Her voice softened. "You made me believe again, too." Marcus swallowed hard. There had been a time long ago when Naomi's belief in him had been the only thing that kept him building, dreaming, surviving. And when he lost her, a part of him had gone silent. He looked at her now, not the girl he once loved, but the woman who had chosen to stand beside him even after the world tried to tear him down. He searched her eyes, wondering if it was too late to reclaim what they had lost. "Naomi," he began, voice rough with vulnerability he rarely showed. "I'm sorry for the way I let ambition, pride, walls get in the way." She reached out, placing her hand lightly over his. Warm, solid, forgiving. "You don't have to apologize for surviving, Marcus," she whispered. "If you want to start living again, I'm here." He turned his hand, threading his fingers through hers, holding on like a man who had finally remembered what it meant to be human. Outside the glass, a plane's lights flickered back on. Tomorrow, Skylux Airlines would fly again. But tonight, inside a quiet terminal, two hearts were learning to take flight once more. Section 5. The new Skylux takes flight. The first plane to take off after Skylux grounding wasn't just carrying passengers. It carried something far more fragile. Hope. Flight 1807, New York to San Francisco. Lifted into the morning sky with a full crew, a full cabin, and a fully transformed spirit. Flight attendants greeted every passenger by name, regardless of status. Gate agents smiled with genuine warmth, not forced courtesy. Pilots came out before boarding, introducing themselves, shaking hands. It wasn't about scripts anymore. It was about seeing people, really seeing them. In a private lounge overlooking the runway, Marcus Richardson stood beside Naomi Carter, coffee in hand, watching the jet soar through the clouds. For the first time in months, maybe years, he felt something settle inside him. Not pride, not vengeance. Peace. "You did it," Naomi said, bumping her shoulder lightly against his. "He did it," Marcus corrected, offering a small, real smile. She smiled back, the kind of smile that made him remember late nights in grad school, eating cheap pizza and dreaming about changing the world. Maybe, somehow, they had. In the weeks that followed, Skylux transformation made headlines. The ceiling had certainly been reached, though often secretly for extended travel. Customer satisfaction ratings skyrocket after airline overhaul. CEO Marcus Richardson named Time magazine's Business Person of the Year. Passengers noticed the difference. Investors noticed the difference. The world noticed the difference. And slowly Marcus allowed himself to imagine a new future. One where he wasn't just a CEO, One where he wasn't just fighting battles, one where he was building something, a life, a love, a legacy. One crisp Saturday morning, Marcus and Naomi found themselves strolling through Central Park, a rare day off between training sessions and meetings. Leaves crunched underfoot. Children laughed in the distance. The world felt simple for the first time in a long time. Naomi tucked her hand into the crook of Marcus's arm naturally, easily. And for a while they walked in comfortable silence, until she stopped beneath an old oak tree, tugging him gently to face her. "Marcus," she said, searching his eyes, "where do you see yourself 5 years from now?" He smiled softly. "Here," he said simply, "to wherever you are." Her eyes shone, and for the first time, Marcus leaned in and kissed her. Off, unhurried. A kiss not of conquest, but of coming home. But peace never lasts forever. That evening, as Marcus was reviewing the final reports on Skylux's reformation success, his assistant Sarah burst into the room, face pale. "Sir, you need to see this. Now." She shoved a tablet toward him. On the screen, a news bulletin was flashing. Quint chuckled, the smile erupting from an uniteration for historic discrimination lawsuits. Multiple former employees claimed that the company knowingly ignored bias complaints for years before the Richardson incident brought the issue to light. Federal investigators have opened a formal inquiry. Marcus's stomach dropped. He scrolled quickly. Internal emails had surfaced. Emails written long before his arrival. Emails showing executives discussing complaints and brushing them aside. "Keep it quiet. He can't afford bad PR," he said. "Richard, a brilliantly bright to make it go away." It wasn't just a few bad apples. It wasn't just Trevor, Jessica, and the captain. It had been systemic for years. Marcus ran a hand down his face, heart pounding. All the progress, all the hope, all the change, now at risk of being exposed as a lie. And worse yet, if it came out that Marcus had invested heavily, had praised Skylux publicly, without knowing the full truth. It wouldn't just ruin Skylux. It could destroy him too. Naomi entered the room moments later, catching his stricken expression. "Marcus," she asked, voice low, "what's happened?" He turned the tablet toward her. She read in silence. Her face didn't show shock, or only sadness. "We thought we were fixing a broken arm," she whispered. "Turns out, the whole body was sick." Marcus dropped into a chair, the weight of realization crashing down. They hadn't just painted over cracks. They had been standing on a rotting foundation all along. And now, if they wanted to truly fix Skylux, they would have to tear it all the way down. Section 6. The Deep Rot. The boardroom was dark, lit only by the blue glow of laptop screens and the sharp outlines of grim faces. Marcus Richardson sat at the head of the table, the confidential reports spread out before him like pieces of a broken mirror. Email. Whistleblower account. Settlement agreements quietly buried for years. The truth was undeniable. Skylux Airlines had built its empire on a foundation of quiet discrimination, covered by polished advertisements and hollow slogans. And now the rot had risen to the surface. Naomi Carter stood beside him, flipping through the files with a sinking heart. Each page was another wound, another betrayal, another lie. Cursing, she said bitterly, slamming a document shut. The police knew passengers were being profiled, harassed, denied opportunities. And they buried it, Marcus added, voice low. Over and over. The evidence was overwhelming. Executives had ignored internal complaints, had silenced whistleblowers with severance packages, Marketing had spun glossy illusions while real people, real lives, were shattered in silence. Marcus leaned back in his chair, rubbing his face with both hands. This wasn't a scandal they could manage. This wasn't a mistake they could fix with training and apologies. It was a cancer, and there were only two options left. Expose it all, risk destroying Skylax and their own reputations. Bury it, and become part of the same sickness they once fought. The room was thick with tension when Elise Domson, Marcus's COO and closest advisor, finally spoke. "There's another option," she said quietly. Marcus looked up sharply. Naomi stiffened. "We go public," Elise continued, "but selectively. We frame it as legacy issues, problems from past leadership. Emphasize the reforms you've already implemented. Protect the brand, protect the employees who are trying." For a moment, the idea hung in the air. Logic, pragmatic, safe. But Marcus saw it for what it was. A cover-up in prettier words. He stared at Elise, his chest tightening. This was the woman who had built Right Tech with him. The woman who had fought by his side through acquisitions, lawsuits, betrayals. And now, she was afraid. Afraid of what the truth would cost. Afraid of losing everything they had built. Maybe. Afraid of losing him too. "We can't lie," Marcus said, voice barely above a whisper. "It's not lying," Elise pressed, her calm veneer cracking. "It's strategy. If we destroy Skylux, we destroy Right Tech too. We lose investor trust. We lose everything." Naomi's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Then we lose everything." All eyes turned to her. "Better to lose everything," she said, "than lose ourselves." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus closed his eyes. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, could feel the weight of two futures pressing down on him. One path, comfort, survival, cowardice. The other, sacrifice, honesty, pain. And somewhere deep inside him, the boy who had once promised his father to build a world where people were judged by character, not color, that boy answered. He opened his eyes, steady, resolved. "We tell the truth," Marcus said. "All of it. No spin, no half measures." Elise's face crumpled, a flash of something between heartbreak and fury. "You're going to kill everything we worked for," she whispered. "No," Marcus said softly. "I'm going to save it." "You're being naive," Elise snapped, standing up so fast her chair clattered backwards. "You think they'll thank you for this?" "They'll crucify you, Marcus. Investors will pull out. Media will paint you as reckless. And Skylax. There will burn." Naomi stood too, stepping between them. "Maybe it should," she said quietly. "Maybe it has to, before something better can rise." Elise's eyes darted between them, between the man she had built empires with and the woman who had once stolen his heart. For a breathless second, Marcus thought she might back down, might join him, might still choose integrity. But instead, Elise's lips pressed into a thin line. And without another word, she walked out of the room. An hour later, Marcus found out the cost of choosing the truth. Emails leaked. Anonymous sources close to Right Tech leadership whispered to the press that Marcus was overreacting, that he was emotionally compromised after his personal incident. Headlines exploded. Right Tech CEO at war with Skylux Airlines leadership. Sources, internal divide over handling of discrimination, scandal. And Marcus knew. Elise had betrayed him, the woman he had trusted most. The woman who knew all his weaknesses, had chosen survival over loyalty. Late that night, Marcus sat alone in his office. The city lights blinked outside. The world moved on without him. In his hand he held the worn photograph he always kept hidden in his wallet. Him at age 11, sitting at a second-hand computer, coding his first program. His father's hand resting proudly on his shoulder. A promise made long ago echoed in his mind. Make them see your heart, son. Not your skin, not your fear, your heart. He pressed the photo to his chest, closing his eyes. And then he stood, straightened his jacket, picked up his phone, and called his lawyer. Draft the statement, Marcus said. Full disclosure, full accountability. No spin, no exceptions. Even if it cost him right tech, even if it cost him everything. He would not betray the boy who had once believed in a better world. Section 7. The Fall and the Fight. The storm Marcus Richardson had tried so long to outrun had finally found him. It wasn't a storm of thunder and rain. It was worse. It was whispers. It was headlines. It was knives hidden behind smiles. The morning after Marcus demanded full disclosure about Skylux's past, Right Tech Solutions, the company he had built from nothing, faced its darkest hour. Overnight, 2 major investors pulled out. Stock prices nosedived 18% before markets even opened. Board members resigned quietly, citing loss of confidence. And the final blow, a class action lawsuit filed by former Skylux employees, claiming that Marcus had known about the discrimination all along and had done nothing until it hurt his reputation. A lie. A devastating, believable lie. In his office, Marcus stared at the news flashing across the monitor. He felt betrayed, not just by Elise's defection, not just by the cowards abandoning him now, but by the realization that everything he had built, every late night, every sacrifice, was crumbling like sand between his fingers. Naomi burst into the room, face pale. Marcus, they're moving to force a vote. The board wants to remove you as CEO. Marcus closed his eyes. It was happening faster than even he had feared. They're blaming you, Naomi whispered. Blaming you for everything. He let out a bitter laugh. Of course they were. When the empire falls, everyone needs a scapegoat. And who better than the man who dared tell the truth? But Naomi wasn't finished. She placed a single sheet of paper on his desk, her hand trembling slightly. You need to see this. Marcus leaned forward. The document was a transcript, private emails, meeting notes, internal memos, evidence. Evidence that Elise Thompson, his closest friend, his COO, the woman he once considered family, hadn't just abandoned him. She had orchestrated the rebellion from the beginning. It was Elise who had whispered doubts into board members' ears. It was Elise who had fed the media stories questioning his judgment. It was Elise who had secretly aligned with outside investors to strip Marcus of his power, all while smiling in his face. Marcus's stomach twisted. He had expected betrayal, but not like this, not from her. She sold you out, Naomi said, her voice low, furious, to save herself. Marcus stood slowly, his hands clenched into fists. The hurt was raw, the betrayal complete. But there was no time for grief, because they were moving fast. And if Marcus didn't act, he wouldn't just lose Right Techer. He'd lose his ability to fight for anyone ever again. That night, Naomi found Marcus standing alone in the Right Tech courtyard, staring up at the stars. He looked smaller somehow, not defeated, but stripped bare. She walked up beside him, their shoulders almost touching. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Naomi broke the silence. There's a way out. Marcus turned his head slightly, weary. Why, I found a clause, she said, buried deep in Right Tech's founding documents. You still hold controlling interest. But you have to act before the emergency vote tomorrow. She hesitated, then continued. You can call for a shareholder referendum, speak directly to the investors, bypass the board. But there's a catch. Marcus waited. You'll have to put everything out in the open. Every secret, every failure, every truth. You'll have to gamble your entire reputation on the belief that people still believe in you. Her eyes were wet, but steady. If you do this, there's no turning back. He swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed for self-preservation. High, spoon, to survive. But survival wasn't enough anymore. Not if it meant becoming the kind of man he had spent his life fighting against. He turned fully toward Naomi. In the cold night air, their breath hung between them like fragile ghosts. Will you stand with me? Marcus asked, his voice breaking ever so slightly. Naomi didn't hesitate. She stepped forward. His hand. Until the end, she said. And in that moment, Marcus knew. He wasn't fighting alone anymore. And sometimes, just sometimes, love wasn't soft. Love was war. Section 8. The speech that shook the world. The grand ballroom of the Lexington Tower was packed. 100 shareholders, 30 board members, 200 media personnel, countless cameras, live streaming to the world. Everyone was waiting to see. Would Marcus Richardson crumble? Would he beg for forgiveness? Would he fall from the empire he built? Or would he rise? Marcus stood alone on the stage, under the brutal lights, as murmurs filled the room. Behind him, a giant screen displayed two simple words. Truth matters. Across the aisle, he could see Elise Thompson sitting tall among the board members, perfect, composed, victorious. At her side, Richard Williams, the embattled CEO of Skylux Airlines, whispered with other executives. They thought this was over. They thought Marcus was already defeated. They didn't know him at all. Marcus stepped to the podium. No notes, no teleprompter, just him and the truth. He took a breath, deep and steady, and began. My name is Marcus Richardson. I am the founder of Right Tech Solutions. And today, I stand before you, not as a CEO, not as a shareholder, not even as a man fighting for his company. I stand here as a human being. The room shifted. The cameras zoomed in. Marcus's voice, low but steady, rolled through the ballroom. He built Right Tech on a dream, particular that technology could make the world more fair, more just, more human. And somewhere along the way, we forgot that dream. He paused, letting the words sink deep. When I boarded that place, when I was removed from my seat, despite doing everything right, I realized it wasn't just about me. It was about every person who has been unseen, unheard, valued. His hand tightened on the podium. RagTech is not perfect. Skylux is not perfect. I am not perfect. A hush fell across the room. But perfection was never the goal. The goal was courage. But courage to face our failures. To tear down systems built on silence. To rebuild not from fear but from hope. Marcus looked straight into the cameras. Straight into the homes of millions watching. Today, I am not asking you to save me. I am asking you to save yourselves. He pointed to the crowd, his voice rising, vibrating with raw conviction. Choose truth. Choose change. Choose the future we once believed in, before fear taught us to settle. A standing ovation erupted. Investors, employees, ordinary citizens watching from afar. Tears. Tears. Hope. Real hope. For a moment, a shining, fragile moment, it felt like the world was changing. But that's when the second knife fell. Just as Marcus stepped back from the podium, a voice cut through the applause. "Is it still courage?" Elise Thompson said loudly, rising from her seat. "If you're hiding your own sins." The room froze. All cameras turned. Elise's smile was razor sharp as she walked toward the stage, holding a thick manila folder. "Tell them, Marcus," she said sweetly. "Tell them about the other investments, the companies you funded quietly. The ones with discrimination scandals of their own." A collective gasp rippled across the room. Marcus stiffened. He knew what she was talking about. Years ago, desperate for funding, he had invested through shell firms in several tech startups. At the time, no one knew those startups had toxic cultures. But now, Elise had the receipts. Taken out of context, twisted, manipulated, it could look like Marcus had always been complicit, that he was no different from the people he condemned. Marcus stepped forward slowly, eyes locked with Elise. She thought she had won, but she could destroy him. But Marcus understood something now, something Elise never would. You can't destroy a man who has already laid everything bare. He took the microphone again. The room held its breath. Marcus's voice was steady as steel. "Yes," he said. "He made investments I regret. I trusted the wrong people. I made mistakes. I failed." He turned, scanning the crowd. "And that is why I stand here now, not pretending to be flawless, but fighting, with everything I have, to be better, to do better." Another ripple of silence. Then, a person began to clap. Then another, and another, until the ballroom exploded in applause once more. Section 9. The Darkest Hour. For 2 days, Marcus Richardson lived in a rare space. A space between hope and fear. The world was rallying to his side. Right tech stock had begun to stabilize. New investors, ones who believed in his vision, were stepping forward. It seemed finally that the tide had turned. He had survived betrayal, survived public crucifixion, survived himself. But he forgot one thing. When you challenge a broken system, it doesn't just fight back. It fights dirty. It started with a phone call. 2:13 a.m. Marcus answered groggily, half expecting bad news about stock prices or legal motions. Instead, a voice, mechanical, cold, filtered through the line. "You should have stayed quiet, Marcus." Click. Dead air. Marcus sat up in bed, heart pounding. He called Naomi immediately. No answer. 20 minutes later, he burst into Naomi's apartment, barely remembering to knock. He found her sitting on the kitchen floor, knees pulled to her chest, trembling. Her laptop was open beside her. On the screen, a leaked video, not of Marcus, of Naomi. A doctored video, cut and edited, showing Naomi allegedly participating in a bias training cover-up scandal during her early career. It was a lie, a brutal, sophisticated lie. But to the public, it would look real. And it would look like Naomi had been part of the very corruption Marcus had vowed to destroy. Naomi's eyes met his, filled with devastation. "They're coming after me now," she whispered. "Because they couldn't break you." And Marcus sank to the floor beside her, gathering her into his arms. "We'll fight it," he said fiercely. "I won't let them destroy you." But even as he spoke the words, reality clawed at the edges of his mind. The media would feast on this. The movement they had built, the fragile trust they had rekindled, would fracture. Not because of truth, but because of perception. And perception, Marcus knew, was deadlier than any bullet. That night, in the quiet wreckage of Naomi's living room, they made the hardest decision of their lives. "You have to distance yourself from me," Naomi said, voice shaking but resolute. "Publicly. Immediately." "No," Marcus said, his voice breaking. "No. We stay together. We face it together." "If you don't," she said, tears spilling down her cheek, "they'll say you protected me, that you hid the truth. They'll burn you down, Marcus, and everything you fought for. You are everything I've fought for," he whispered. But Naomi was already pulling away, already setting the terms of her own sacrifice. "If you love me," she said, voice raw, "immobile, then let me go. Save yourself. Save what we built. And when this is over," her voice cracked, "if there's anything left of us, I'll find my way back to you." The next morning, the headlines screamed, "Marcus Richardson severs ties with Naomi Carter amid ethics scandal." "Romance or cover-up, Right Tech CEO faces new firestorm." And Marcus? He stood alone at a press conference, face stone cold, heart shattering inside his chest. He read the statement Naomi had helped him write. "Effective immediately, Drama Carter will step down from all official roles associated with Right Tech Solutions to ensure full transparency during ongoing investigations. Dr. Carter's contributions have been invaluable, and we honor her integrity and commitment to justice." He didn't waver. He didn't cry. He didn't reveal that every word cost him another piece of his soul. After the cameras stopped flashing, Marcus walked out into the cold rain. No cook, no umbrella, just grief. The city blurred around him, faithless and uncaring. He had won the battle, but he was losing the war inside his own heart. And for the first time since that brutal day on the Skylux flight, Marcus Richardson wondered if the cost of fighting for truth was simply too high. Section 10. The Final Betrayal. The rain fell harder that night, turning New York's streets into rivers of shadow and neon. Marcus sat alone in his office, the walls closing in. The press conference was over. The headlines were brutal. The movement he had built teetered on the edge of collapse. And Naomi? Naomi was gone. Because he had let her go. To save them both. Or so he thought. It was after midnight when the truth finally arrived. A text message. Blocked number. One attachment. No words. Just a video file. Marcus clicked. At first, he didn't understand what he was seeing. A boardroom. A familiar one. Right Tech's executive lounge. Elise Thompson stood at the head of the table. But she wasn't alone. Sitting across from her, smiling like vultures in designer suits, were representatives from Skylux Airlines. And next to them, Richard Williams, Skylux's CEO. And someone else. Someone Marcus hadn't suspected. Thomas Grady, his own CFO. The man who had signed off on every deal, every defense fund, every press release. The man Marcus had trusted like a brother. In the grainy footage, Thomas leaned forward, voice crystal clear. "Once Marcus is isolated," Thomas said, "but Carter is discredited, we install Elise as interim CEO. Skylux will retain exclusive rights to Right Tech's Diptych." Marcus froze. Skylux didn't just want to silence him. They wanted everything. His company, his technology, his soul. And Elise. Elise hadn't been fighting for survival. She had been fighting for his throne. Marcus dropped the phone. He clattered onto the hardwood floor, the screen cracking. His whole body shook, not with fear, with rage. Not blind rage, cold, righteous fury. They hadn't just betrayed him. They had tried to erase him. They had tried to erase Naomi. He stood slowly, every move deliberate, every breath controlled, and he realized he wasn't just fighting for right tech anymore. He was fighting for every person who had ever been silenced, forgotten, discarded, and he would not let them win. Not this time. Not ever. The next morning, Marcus Richardson walked into the emergency shareholder meeting with the kind of calm that only comes from having nothing left to lose. The room quieted instantly. Cameras flashed. Elise sat at the table, perfect and smiling, pretending nothing was wrong. Thomas sat beside her, hands folded neatly, expression blank. The vultures were ready. But Marcus wasn't prey. He was the reckoning. Without waiting for permission, Marcus pulled a remote from his pocket. Clicked once. The massive screen behind him lit up. The secret video, the footage of Elise, Thomas, and Skylax, began to play. Gasps filled the room. The board members turned pale. The reporters leapt to their feet. Elise's smile died. Thomas tried to stand. Security guards appeared at the exits. No one was leaving. Not yet. Marcus turned to face them. "You thought you could erase me," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You thought you could steal what we built. But you forgot one thing." He stepped closer, pointing directly at Elise. "I built this company on truth. And today, truth wins. But even victory has a price." The legal fallout was swift. Elise was arrested for corporate fraud. Thomas was indicted for conspiracy. Skylax faced federal investigations. Right tech stock surged as the world rallied behind Marcus. But Marcus didn't feel triumph, because the war had cost him Naomi. Her sisters could fill that hollow place where she once stood. 3 weeks later, the city was cold, the first snow dusting the sidewalks. Marcus found himself standing outside a quiet bookstore, tucked between two towering buildings. He almost didn't go inside, almost turned away. But then, through the frosted window, he saw her, Naomi, sitting alone at a small table, a worn book in her hands, a cup of coffee growing cold beside her. Her face was tired, her eyes distant. But she was there, and somehow, impossibly, still waiting. Marcus pushed the door open. The little bell above it chimed, fragile and pure. Naomi looked up. Their eyes met. And for a moment the world disappeared. No cameras, no lawsuits, no betrayals. Just them. Just two battered souls who had fought too long, lost too much, and still somehow found their way back to each other. Marcus crossed the room, stopped in front of her. No grand speeches, no apologies. I missed you." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She stood, stepped into his arms, and whispered against his chest, "Welcome home. Conclusion. Truth, love, and the legacy we leave behind." The first snow of the season drifted gently against the bookstore windows as Marcus Richardson held Naomi Carter in his arms, the world blurring beyond the glass. It wasn't a grand reunion. There were no fireworks, no applause. Just two people, bruised by life, clinging to the fragile miracle that they were still standing, and still standing together. It would take time to heal the wounds, time to rebuild the dreams shattered by betrayal. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus wasn't afraid of the road ahead. Because he had learned something that no empire, no title, no fortune could ever teach. The greatest victories are not the ones the world sees. They are the quiet ones. The ones fought in the lonely hours. The ones fought for love, for dignity, for the simple right to hope again. Marcus had set out to build a company. He ended up building a revolution. But in the end, it wasn't right tech that defined him. It wasn't stock prices or magazine covers or keynote speeches. It was the quiet moments, the impossible choices, the brokenness he chose to confront, not just in the world but in himself. He had faced betrayal not with hatred, but with courage. He had lost love and still dared to believe in it again. He had been stripped of everything and discovered that the only thing worth saving had never been his company. It had been his humanity. And Naomi, who had seen his heart when the world only saw power, who had loved him not for his empire but for his fight. She was the proof that sometimes the people we lose are not truly lost. Sometimes they are simply waiting for us to find the way back to ourselves first. And when we do, they are still there. Arms open, hearts open, ready to begin again. This story, Marcus and Naomi's story, is not just about injustice and redemption. It's about the choices we make when no one is watching. It's about standing up when it's easier to kneel. It's about holding on to the people who believe in us, even when the world demands we let go. And above all, it's about remembering that love is never weakness. Love is the only thing strong enough to survive the fire.
Thank you for watching this Millionaire Love Stories today. Every love story is a journey, filled with passion, heartbreak, and unforgettable moments. And here at Millionaire Love Stories, we bring you the most captivating tales of love, wealth, and destiny. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget, like to support more incredible content. Comment your thoughts. Would you choose love over riches? Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Millionaire Love Stories, because love knows no limits. Because love changes everything. See you in the next story.